So the square root of 25, radical 25 is 5. The square root of 25 is also negative 5, because negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. So we write it like this. We write radical 25, the square root of 25, equals plus or minus 5. It can be positive 5 or it can be negative 5. There are two values. I have two answers. I have positive 5 and I have negative 5. So let's do a little bit of practice. If you had the problem tonight on your homework, x squared equals 16, is that a quadratic equation? What's the characteristic of quadratic equations? What does it have to have? It has to have an exponent of 2. Does this have an exponent of 2? So is it quadratic? Yeah. So let's find our answers. This is a parabola. All right, so how do you get x alone? What do you do? How do you get x alone? I've got x squared over here. How do you get rid of a squared? Yeah, you square root both sides. You do the opposite. I square root both sides. They're inverses. Square rooting and squaring are inverses, so now I have x equals... What?
Negative or positive 4.
It could be positive 4, or it could be negative 4. There are two solutions. So this parabola, if I graphed it, would cross at 4 and at negative 4. There are two answers. So my x equals 4 and my x equals negative 4. Those are my two answers. Aiden. Nope. We don't have to graph because we can use square roots. If you couldn't use square roots and you couldn't factor it, yes, you'd have to graph it. Let's try another one. X squared equals 36. Is it quadratic? Yes. So let's solve for x. The inverse of squaring something is the square root. So x equals what? Plus or minus 6. So my two solutions are x equals 6 and x equals negative 6. And you guys, when your b value is 0, that means your axis of symmetry, your negative b over 2a, if your b is 0, your axis of symmetry is always going to be in the middle. So you have reflected zeros. All right, try this one. Is it quadratic? Yes, it has an x squared. It has an exponent of 2. So if I want x by itself, what am I going to do? Square root both sides. Perfect. X equals what? Why doesn't it make sense, Alyssa? The only way to get negative 4 as an answer is to do 2 times negative 2. And are those the same number? Up here I had 5 times 5, and I had negative 5 times negative 5. But down here, the only way I can do that is if one's positive and one's negative. So can you do the square root of a negative number? So this can't be square rooted. This problem I could not solve using square roots. You either have to factor it or graph it. So sometimes you run into problems that you can't use this trick on. So the thing we're looking for is we're looking for a b value that is 0. every single problem, we want to find a b value equals 0. If the b value is equal to 0, we can use square roots. So let's glue our extra work. So again, we're looking for when b equals 0. That's our key. And there are 3 simple steps. Step 1, when b equals 0, we're going to isolate the x squared. Isolate the x squared. What does that mean to isolate the x squared? What does isolate mean, Katie? Yeah, to get it alone, right? So you're going to most likely move C using inverse operations. Maybe it's already by itself. I don't know. Move C, or maybe you have to move A. I don't know. But you're going to isolate x squared. You're going to get x squared all by itself. Step 2. You're going to square root both sides. And why are we doing a square root? Well, because that's to get x alone. The inverse of squaring something. Square root both sides. And here's the best thing about today. The numbers you're really looking for in this problem are 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49. Do you see a pattern here? They're all perfect squares. These are the numbers we're looking for. Most of your problems are going to deal with this. When you see those numbers in your head, you should think, oh, I'm probably going to use the square root formula. And the last one is you write your answer as plus or minus. Right? There are 2 solutions. So let's practice. I'm going to put a little asterisk here, I guess. There's one time where there's not 2 solutions. There's only one number that has 1 solution. There's only one number that's going to give you 1 solution. Everything else should give you 2 solutions. If it can be done. Here we go. X squared plus 5 equals 5. Is it quadratic? Yes, it has an x squared. So what's my first step? isolate the x squared. So what do I need to move away from the x squared? Plus 5. How do you move a plus 5? Now, you guys, this is different. Every other problem we've dealt with so far has asked it to have the problem equal 0. Square rooting does not make you do that. Square rooting is different. So now I'm left with x squared equals what? 0. Is x alone now? Not yet. There's a squared with it. How do you get rid of that squared? Step 2, square root both sides. So x equals, what's the square root of 0? Why not plus or minus 0? 0 can't be positive, 0 can't be negative. It's the only one where there is only one solution. Let's try another one. Is it quadratic? Yes. It equals 0. I could factor it or even graph it, right? But I'm solving using square roots. So if I want square roots, I want x squared alone. So what do I move away first? I add 25. What's my left side say? 4x squared equals 25. Is x squared alone now? So what do I do now? Divide by 4. X squared equals, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at 25 over 4, and I'm going to think to myself, oh, those numbers look familiar. I'm not going to find the decimal of this. 25 and 4 are both perfect squares. So I'm going to leave it that way. 25 over 4. But is x by itself yet? So I square root. So x equals what? The square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 4 is 2. But I'm not quite there yet. It could be positive or it could be minus. So my final answer to this problem is 5 over 2 or negative 5 over 2. I have two solutions to that problem. Let's try this one. 100x squared plus 49 equals 0. It's quadratic. So I want to isolate x squared. What do I move? Subtract 49 from both sides. And I get 100x squared equals negative 49. We still have 2 minutes. Now what do I do? Divide by 100. X squared equals, should I find the decimal of this? I can do negative 49 over 100 because they're both perfect squares, right? All right, keep going. So square root them. But you should stop. What's inside your square root? Can you have a negative inside your square root? So this can't be done by the square root. There's no solution to this by square rooting. One last one. Let's see if we can get it. X plus 5 squared equals 16. Before you get rid of this plus 5, because I can't get rid of it, I'm going to square root both sides first. This is the only time when there's a quantity. So what's the square root of x plus 5 squared? These just cancel out and I get x plus 5. equals, what's the square root of 16? Plus or minus 4. Now I'm going to make two problems. X plus 4 equals, or x plus 5 equals positive 4, and x plus 5 equals negative 4. Minus 5, so my first solution is x equals negative 1. Minus 5, my next solution is x equals negative 9. It goes pretty fast if you understand your list of perfect squares. In fact, 80% of it's almost mental math.